Alright. Welcome back to Skeleton Knight to Another World. Anime Review Episode 13. Let's not get my final thoughts on the first season of the show. I say it's a season because, well, here's the thing. If you're curious though, how many books left to adapt and there's enough material for season 2? The answer is, well, for that question, the answer is yes. How many books? There are currently 7 books left to be adapted. 7. This season now, the first book and the second book. In the first book, they mostly adapt that one. There's actually a whole sequence they completely cut from the anime with Arc meeting that noblewoman's family, which that was completely cut out of the anime for some strange reasons. But for chapter 2 forward, they're mostly acting pretty faithful to source material, though they did basically move up Ponyta's debut by one episode. Basically, the episode with Arlene showing up in, that's kind of basically the first time that Ponyta first showed up in the anime, in the actual light novels. While in the case of the series, it's basically Arc doing his first job in the first episode. And it's interesting, though, you have Arlene opening title sequence, and you briefly see her in episode 1, does not really have interaction with Arc at all. Arc sees her. She does not talk to Arc at all. And then, the next time you see her is not into episode 3, which, by the way, they do briefly mention his brief glance at this woman back in episode 1. But then, it's completely ignored. It's oh, I've seen this before. And then, of course, she becomes friendly with him because of the Ponyta stuff. Because of Ponyta. So, eventually, after a little bit, he's able to basically gain her trust and to rescue some elves by basically showing her his face. Now, I do appreciate some basically stuff that where this season pretty much kept a lot of stuff pretty faithful to the source material. Yeah, there was at least as far as I can tell when it comes to chapters. In the case second book by far has got the really good adaptation. It doesn't really change much of anything per se. It adapts pretty much all the entire book. So book 2, you can definitely say, yeah, they pretty much adapted the whole thing. Now, if you're curious though, to basically know where the series started off with, the very first book, well, in the case of the first episode per se, that adapted pretty much in the way the prologue and the first, well, not the entire first chapter per se, but some of it. Second episode, chapters 2 and 3. The third episode, this one adapts most of chapter 3. And then episode 4 adapts the rest of chapter 3, moving to chapter 4. Episode 5 basically finishes up chapter 4 and the epilogue, but doesn't adapt the entirety of it. No, not per se. It does have the first half of chapter 1, that's a little bit from chapter 2. Basically, it's finished up with the next part of the episode. In episode 6, they cover pretty much the rest of chapter 1 and the second half of chapter 3. So, not entirely of a chapter per se, but there's that. Then, of course, they kind of put the first half in the next episode while adapting the first half of chapter 4. This is, of course, from book 2, mind you. Yes, book 2. By episode 8, they pretty much, in a way, go straight to chapter 4. Now, if you're curious, though, do they adapt the manga? The epilogue. Well, they do it by episode 9. 9 is when they pretty much wrap up adapting. So, overall, the first 4 episodes, the first 5 episodes, mostly cover the first book. That's pretty much, we can say, yes, that's what it pretty much covers. Takes the first 5 episodes per se, though this is pretty much all of the epilogue, a lot of it's skipped over. And then pretty much it starts adapting from that point forward, and basically for book 5, and it wraps up by episode 9. Yes, episode 9. With these last few episodes, you have the first episode adapting the second half of chapter 1 for book 3 and chapter 2. And then by last week's episode, They adapt the first half of chapter 4, and this episode they pretty much finish up that one. Now, here's kind of the weird thing related to this particular series, is that if you look at, let's say, book 3, like with book 1, not the entire book was adapted. Book 2, definitely. Book 2 is the only one of the 3 books adapted for the season that were fully adapted. So, yes, it's pretty faithful, but there's still enough material here you could do at least an OVA per se. I'd say at least 2. I'd say the first one we cover Arc Mead and No One's Family, he'd be rescuing in the first episode. Aside from that, the only other thing I could possibly say adapted for this particular series is probably the third chapter of book 2. Now, in the case of what was skipped over, like they also skipped over some side stuff per se, like most like being a guard or basically like a little bit of mundane stuff they probably skipped over for time purposes, just to keep the series progressing forward. Which don't have a really big problem with that. It's basically just you could see it as padding, and the anime is removing that padding, just basically shooting it straight forward. Is anything lost per se in this? Well, they do skip over a subplot basically in this one involving Arc and Arlene meeting children. And also, in the case of the last few episodes, Jerome, the female, the cat ninja who's popping up since episode 3, she is mostly been edited out. She's been mostly been cut out of the adaptation process for book 3. Because, here's the thing, she's there in the book. If you read the book, she's actually in all the stuff they adapted. I mean, yeah, she's not in just toward the end of like episode 10. She wasn't like absent for like, oh, was she absent most book 3? No, she was there from the start. Yep. So, not much to say about this series. It's just really good. I do recommend it for people who are fans of anime. Like, the studio did a great job with it. It's just that I wish they would have, like, take some to adapt some of the sub stuff. You get the subplot. Now, do I think they should make an OVA doing all the world building stuff, the mundane stuff? No, not really. It's not really needed. I would say the only thing I would probably adapt is, like I said, Arc's meeting with the No One's Family met back in episode 1. The story with a child, that can make a good OVA. And Arc and Arlene meeting the Duke and his elf wife. Yes, there's a whole chapter that basically this episode series skipped over for book 3. So book 3 is not fully adapted. It's mostly adapted, except chapter 3 and the epilogue are not really adapted per se. But yeah, not much to say about it. It's really good. Can't wait for season 2 if they ever really announce a season 2. I hope so, because this series has something common with the series How I Really Served With the Kingdom, where I read a lot of light novels before the series even started. Yes, How I Really Served With the Kingdom was kind of the same way too. As of this moment, as this video, I am pretty much in a way read the entire, almost every single light novel released in English so far. I have not read book 10 yet. I'm waiting for the actual release for it, so I'll agree with then. The manga, I've read pretty much all the chapters been released so far, except for the last 2 or 3. So there's that. So that's going to pretty much it for of you. Stay tuned next review for being 2 straight comic corners. I'm going to take a little break and come back here for those 2 comic corners, okay? Next video. Bye.